Good morning, Portland. Good morning. So we have been woken up by Ken, which means that now we're going to get started into some technical conversations and presentations. So it's my job as the first day keynote is to awaken everybody's mind and get them activated into this process. So I'm going to start this off with some riddles or some paradoxes of things that shouldn't be. For instance, I'm going to ask you, what is something you can hold in your left hand that you cannot hold in your right hand? Your right hand, right. Yes, good, good, good. All right, we're starting to think here. Here's another one. Put your hand out like this. The other hand out like this. Together. Interlock the fingers. Turn it over. Thumbs all the way down, all the way down. And then last thing, through the middle like this. Just bring it right back up. Easy. When the video comes out in a couple of weeks, you'll figure out how I did that. And the last thing is the most paradoxical, the most confusing part of this is, why are we all here? Why are we here celebrating React Native? Why is React Native doing so well? What's so special about that? And it seems like it's a simple answer, but it's really not. The first piece of this is that React Native has been around for 9 years. Wow, that's old. It's older than a lot of y'all's kids. It's older than I think some people have been in programming here. So React Native doing this for 9 years. As developers, one thing that we generally do is we start to disqualify that background noise. We say, oh, okay, it's been there for a long time. It's not that important anymore. So the first question I want to show you here is like, I really want to drive it home. I want you to feel and understand just how important it is. And we're going to go ahead. We're all nerds here, right? All right. Nobody's afraid of a little bit of math. I know Kenneth's going to be happy. You can hear him screaming and squealing in the back there. Math teachers love this stuff. But I want to go ahead and ask you this really interesting question. And people who are runners generally know this as well. We're going to start off with a little weird moment here where we have a runner called runner A. And he starts off at start point, runs to some point X, doesn't matter where that is. So we have him beginning. So let's see if we can get runner A animated here. There he is. Look at him go. So he's going to run towards point X. And he's running at velocity lambda. I don't know how fast you like to run, but lambda's a pretty good speed to go. That's one of my favorites. And as he runs to point X, he gets there, and then he instantly turns around and runs back at average velocity lambda, getting back to the starting point, completing the race. Lambda there, lambda back. Now runner B is going to run at a different speed, at the same start point and end point. I might need to be closer to this. So they start there, and they're going to run to the same exact X point. They're going to turn around instantly. But what they did is they were so excited. They ran there at 2 lambda, twice the average velocity. They got winded at the end, though, and they went back at half lambda. So 2 times there, half back. So here's an interesting thing. The situation is as follows. Runner A runs there and back, velocity lambda there and back. Runner B goes at 2 lambda, comes back at half. Now, as developers, we're like, this is an easy problem. There's 3 different situations that could happen. Either A wins, B wins, or the one, which one do you think it is? They tie. Well, here's the weirdest part about it. Consistency is key. Mathematically, A wins. That feels kind of counterintuitive. Doesn't make sense right there. But what happens is, even if you took runner B and gave him 3 times lambda in his initial run, he really pushed hard. But then he gave up and he ran back at half that speed. The winner is still going to be runner A. Consistency in something over 9 years is not something to be laughed at. And when you work with people, you realize that. We value consistency with one another. But that's not the only thing React Native did. A lot of other companies also tried to do the same cross-platform mentality, and they all promised the same thing. And some of them had consistency as well. So when you're stuck with a situation, why, after all this time, do you see Amazon here? Do you see Microsoft here? You see so many companies adopting React Native out of all the options that have been promised over longer than 9 years. Well, there's a couple of solutions I could think of. One, maybe React is exactly like React Native, so you don't have to really learn anything between those two. But the answer is that is absolutely patently false. What else could it be? Well, maybe you have another situation. Maybe, went ahead of myself. Yeah, you knew that was coming. Maybe JavaScript's the most ideal programming language in the whole world, and no one has any problems with it, and it's the best. There you go. If anybody says they understand JavaScript, please have them see a medical professional. And then the last piece here is perhaps React Native is the messy result of imperfect practices and desire that made a little bit of room for a miracle. So in order to kind of bring this together for you, I want to, and hear me well, skip slides very fast, and then go back to them. But the other thing I want to do is I want to connect the dots. Hear my words here. We're going to connect the dots on why I think we all ended up in this room, okay? And it starts, I need to go all the way back. Does anybody know who this nerd is? Sir Tim Berners-Lee. This guy wanted to go ahead and invent a way to send and look at universally linked files to one another on a next computer while he was sitting there, and he should have been working at the CERN laboratory. But instead, he wanted to go ahead and build something to go ahead and get more information with his friends. Do you think that he knew that he was building the World Wide Web then? Perhaps not. The next thing that happens in sort of the history to bring us this is that we have Brendan Eich. Do you know famously how many days he had in order to build JavaScript? 10 days. JavaScript was built in 10 days. Makes sense. So Mosaic turned into Netscape. Netscape said, we want to go ahead and do something. And so they invented, what was it? Originally it was Mocha. Then they turned it into LiveScript. And then ultimately they named it JavaScript because it has nothing to do with Java. Java is to JavaScript as car is to carnival. They both share so many letters. So then we have this problem, though. You have, and I'm sorry, Microsoft people, we have a little hiccup when Internet Explorer gets introduced, so we get JScript. And JScript starts to say, we don't have to do what we connect everybody. We are winning. We're winning the browser war. And so that's why we don't have ECMA4. You see us always skip. There's no ES4 because they pulled out, and later on, Microsoft came back as our idea for TypeScript and added types to JavaScript, but that's okay. So what ended up happening is we said, hey, we hate building an entire website for each possible browser. And then John Resig says, I got this. What if I create jQuery, and then you just have to use jQuery, and it'll work on all the browsers? You have just a person here with a vision kind of connecting it. And what that does is that builds this inevitable sort of connection for JavaScript going all over the place. We have paved the road for Node.js, which is going to put JavaScript on the back end. So now we're getting JavaScript all over the place. We have this JavaScript everywhere idea. That makes us need to start making larger JavaScript libraries. And is anybody around in 2010 when these two came out? In October 2010, yeah. Do you still, like, does anybody understand Angular 1.0? I never got a handle of it. It never worked. 1.0 was devastatingly difficult. The idea here was, I know what to do. Angular is what the browser would have been if it was meant for apps. And so you have this directional communication back and forth, and you get stuck in that. But then you have Backbone that says, look, we're going to be a little bit simpler. We're going to pull things back. We're going to disconnect the data from the visual. And so you start to get these approaches coming through, and then people say, well, how far can we take JavaScript? And then you get PhoneGap. So PhoneGap wraps the idea. It goes from the web going into mobile. So here we are, we're putting a web view on mobile. We're trying to make that. We have this write once, run anywhere mentality that is famously placed there. And the experience is that all the wonderful things you love about JavaScript then go on your mobile phones. And in that sin, I wrote a blog post in 2012, and one of the creators of PhoneGap was very upset at me. He actually did you could find it on the internet, he did a counter article saying that was completely wrong. But what I did was I said, look, I think you need to go the other way. I think that it's important. We were using Ruby Motion back in those days. And what that did is that said, let's go from native a little bit more towards web rather than going web and just jamming it into native. And famously, at that same time, Mark Zuckerberg says in 2012, the biggest mistake we made as a company was betting too much on HTML5 as opposed to native. So we started to get this thing, everybody's connecting, everything's going together, but we have this hiccup. And that gets me to the next sort of paradoxical thing that happens. Developers, we have this really weird thing where we hate the unknown and unknowable. We love small, calculatable pieces to end up where you know you want to inevitably be. That's called the Ellsberg paradox. The Ellsberg paradox lets you find out that coming in from a creative angle is not as easy as you want it to be. And when you do, you get a face like this. Here is Tomacino in 2013 telling the world, we're going to do something different. We're from a company that's not been doing much open source. It is Facebook at the time. And they say, hey, we're going to make this glorified diffing engine. This glorified diffing engine, which is going to allow us to go ahead and decouple the idea of, we're just going to make the visual aspect a function of state. And then we're going to have this virtual DOM. We're going to have this complete capability of don't worry about it. And people laughed. And do you remember, I don't know if any of you were around or if you've looked this up, this came with a bunch of unidirectional data flow, opinions, a totally different view of things, and JSX. When JSX came out, what happened? Everybody said, did we not learn anything from separation of concerns? JSX is an abomination. Well, I wish those people probably go delete those messages today. So React starts turning heads. You start to see ACM articles about functional turns on writing JavaScript, functional encapsulation of components. You start to get some momentum here. React comes out of nowhere. If someone was using Angular, and someone came up and said, I'm using that new Facebook thing. I'm using React. You were like, really? How's that going for you? And you're like, oh, I like it. You're like, well, really? Oh, maybe I'll try that. And that's when things started to change. In 2015, ES5 comes back, and a hackathon happens at Meta. A hackathon. A 3-day hackathon where someone, and just in 3 days, puts a proof of concept, 2 people, put the proof of concept to do React-style structure on native. So there you go. You're getting React on native, and you're actually being able to implement that. And this starts to set things on fire. Also, funny enough, in 2015, we have a couple other things that happen. So we have, so that's Jordan Walk and Christopher Shadow in just a short amount of time, and it starts to take off. We see React Native begin. And its mantra is learn once, write anywhere. It's not a marketing ploy. It's not a huge dev push. It's not a giant company saying this is what we need to do. It comes from a hackathon, and people start to do it in 2015. Same time in 2015, fun fact, the wonderful people at the 2 companies of Infinite Red meet together in Paris. And we say, hey, we're doing a lot of native development in all these platforms. So as a fun fact, we actually met, and this is the kitchen table. You can see some fun people there. We got Mark Rickard, who gave a speech last year. You got Jamin up there, Todd. You got quite a few people from the company who come together and say, let's start doing this React Native thing right as it starts. Let's see if this is actually real or not. So when we get to that point, we actually tell ReactConf in 2017, we're going to do a conference, and they put us up on the screen, which was really cool. But another really cool thing I couldn't wait to put on there is that in the last ReactConf in 2024, there we are again in the middle of the screen. So that's amazing. Our goal is that same level of consistency, and in 2017, we put on the world's first and only React Native only conference. And people come here, and we actually start to exchange ideas, and React Native starts to go through all kinds of different iterations, and we get excited. Another one thing that happens in 2017, some little known company called Google decides to throw something out there called Flutter. Now, what I love about Flutter is that it's everything and nothing at the same time, but we try it, and it goes through a different approach. Google is good at getting developers to try things. They get up there and they show you, hey, this is a cool thing that you need to start to do. They start offering jaw-dropping examples. They have so many different initiatives and plans, and when you start to look at Flutter, you're like, oh my goodness, is this going to be the React Native killer? And it starts to become a little frightening at first. But I want to ask you something, because I think that this kind of answers that question as well. Let's say I have Tim. He's obviously a runner, by the way. And he studies 31 hours every week for class. And then we also have Tom. Tom is right next to him. And he studies 31 hours every day for class, outside of class, has a brother and 2 sisters, often visits his grandparents, went once on a blind date, shoots pool every couple of months. Now, which one, Tim or Tom, has the higher GPA? And the truth of the matter is, when you ask people this question, the majority of people say that Tim probably has the higher GPA. And they both study the exact same amount. But this is another thing about us and our ability to connect. There's a thing that we call diagnostic dilution. When you try to do many things, then it starts to make one of the things that you do feel like it might be just a little bit less than it could be if somebody just doing that thing for information gathered. So I ask you this. For Google, what's their programming language? Is it Angular? Is it Go? Is it Dart? Is it, oh, I don't know, what did they come up with? Is Carbon, their C++ competitor, right? You start to have, and then at the same time, they remove things. They remove things just as fast as they come in. So they ran, I will say, 3 times Lambda at the beginning here. But one of the things that we all pay attention to is that we don't just look at the information, we diagnose it. And so at the same time, in 2017, when those things were happening, at ReactConf, they were saying, we are not going to add features to React. We are only going to make it better. So I believe that it is messy. React, there's so many talks about what you should do in React and React Native. But the door is open for us to go ahead and find our own way along that. The most important React Native moments from there forward are simple, like things like, oh, there we go, sorry. Kill the joke. Everyone uses Redux. Redux is dead, long live Redux. So Redux fans? Additionally, Redux was done for, that was done just for a talk. It was a proof of concept for time travel debugging during a talk. Another important moment, objects suck, use functions, use effect, and then David says, goodbye use effect. Don't do that either. And then lastly, the really important ones, which navigation library should we still use? When should we start using the new architecture? And how do I get my boss to pay for me to go to Chain React? So with these pieces in place, I think that there's a key part here that we are working together on each of these pieces. We're working to make this stuff happen, and it doesn't make sense. When you're on top of the mountain, the path looks simple, but if you look at the open source, we're seeing over 100,000 stars for React Native. You're seeing over 2,500 contributors. You're seeing like 32,000 commits. React Native is not just one company saying what to do or one person saying what to do. There are no kings in React Native, and I think that that's part of what brings a piece to it. But there's another thing here that logically, other technologies should have won all along the way. Everybody at every moment, it was, if you asked business or engineers, us being here, using Meta's open source to build JavaScript-based apps for mobile and having other Fortune 100 say, that's a good idea, didn't make logical sense. Unless you realize that we're all seeking connection. The thing that made all those pieces work, that actually unravels all those riddles, is that people were looking for a way to connect with other people, to connect platforms, and to connect their technology and the way they communicate. And as React and React Native starts to happen all around the world, you can see all these people coming together. It's the same thing that sort of brings you here, right? You are a React Native developer. You know React Native technology. In that same vein, in the same way that the Velcro, the microwave, and penicillin were invented, they weren't designed to be something that you are going to get. It's something that you are going to get together. Thank you.